this is a very brief intro, but you can check online, and he has a really big credential. So he's an English professor at Columbia State Community College. His books of poetry have received X.J. Kennedy Prize and the Nicholas Roerich Prize, and there's one more, I think. And he has published 5 books, and he teaches and edits an online journal, one. Thank you. Jeff Harden.
Good. Well, thank you for being here. I had a handout that I gave. Hopefully everybody has one. If you don't, there's some extras up here on the table. Before I actually begin this, I think I'll read a poem, if you don't mind. I was struck by Linda has the poem called A Poem Is, and I've written a whole bunch of poems that have titles like A Poem is a Way of Vanishing, A Poem is an Invitation, A Poem is, and so they all have similar titles. And I did a workshop recently called A Poem is a Leaping into Possibilities. So that's the title of this. A poem is a leaping into possibilities. A violinist tells me I live in the smallest room. One note I've remembered all my life for how it seemed to hold a crowd of people inside a single breath. This far into the soul, I'm feeling more and more weightless, sensing how the tenses moving in and out of one another don't begin or end. Vowels lift the mind from holding on to what it hopes to know, which, like a reed beside a pond, can only bow before what being bent bestows. Existence may be psalm or rain or soaring, may be poem or silence, inheritance or emptiness, but also it is a leaping into possibilities. Humming, I've pulled to myself the farthest stars. Holding stones, I've conceded many sins. Standing near puddles, I've stepped into countless skies. So I gave this talk last year at the Duck River Writers Conference at Columbia State. And it's based on something I've been doing in my classes for a lot of years, but I've never really formalized discussing it. And so the title of this is A Poet Owns a Word and a Word Owns a Poem. More than 20 years ago, while teaching at a workshop for 8th through 12th graders, I created an exercise that I referred to as accountability. I led students through a list of categories that, as a writer, I told them they would be held accountable for. Writing should be seen as a job, I said, and just as one is held accountable to do the work of a job, one should be held accountable to the work of writing. One by one, I offered these categories, asking students to make a list of things born from their own lives, a list that only they could produce. None of us has the same experience, I said, so our list will inevitably be different. And all those differences, added together, might get us closer toward a fullness of existence. Mine added to yours, yours added to mine. All of us ushered in to the miracle of our own existences within a framework of countless other miracles of existences. That was more than 20 years ago, back when I was bold and brash and given to hyperbolic claims. I have to tell you today, though, that I've come to say the same thing I said then, only more so, with an even deeper conviction, and with a more hopeful expectation of what might arise if each of us took ourselves seriously and knew once and for all how accountable we will be held for our materials. No one has been given your material, only you. If and when you fall down on your job, you shortchange not only yourself, but all the rest of us who might have had a different experience had we encountered your poem, story, essay, aphorism, journal entry, letter, etc. Diminish yourself, and you diminish us all. These categories I began with all these years ago include the following: things, objects, locations, people, memories, phrases or language, a word, and then lastly, a theme. So I gave students 5 minutes for each category to make a list. No one else can write about the discarded cigar tips that littered the yard of my papa's house on County Home Road when I visited as a 6-year-old. No one else can write about a creek bank along Horse Creek in the southeast corner of Hardin County, where I batted rocks across the creek in the late evenings or stalked the shallows searching for arrowheads. Not one person other than me has been given a memory of my dad's knuckles wrapping the back window of his '51 Chevrolet at the exact moment I prepared to throw a rock at a mailbox as we came out of the S-curve on Highway 69 on our way toward our campsite. My grandfather, not yours, my naive, innocent-minded, take people on their word grandfather, the one who lost upwards of $3 million because he trusted people to do the right thing and honor the words they refused to keep. He used to say about such matters, well, you know, if they can live with it, I can live without it. That language has been given to me, just as specific language has been given to you. My child, not yours, once held my wife's leg and pulled me toward her and said, Daddy, kiss your life. Daddy, don't you want to kiss your life on the mouth? Kiss your life on the mouth. He was confusing the word wife for life. Wonderful. But one of these categories, a word, has always interested me, especially since, as a poet, words can sometimes seem tactile, touchable. Words can seem full of their own sweet taste, and saying the right one can set in motion a world that wasn't there before. One word leading to another, and all of them somehow aware of and in sympathy with all the others. In a sense, that's what a poem is, a symphony of words that appear to be consciously aware of every other word. Having taught for almost 30 years now, I have an interest in putting us all in closer sympathy with the words we use, the words we bring into our beings, the words that, to one degree or another, actually form our being. That is, give birth to, shape it, set it in motion, make it sing. Which word are you? Which word do all your other words issue out of and point back to? I don't know if there's a clear answer to that question, but perhaps for others looking on, there might be a convincing argument to be made. Here's one of my mantras. A poet owns a word. What do I mean? Think about it. Which poet owns the word slant? Which poet owns the word yawp? Which poet owns nightingale, or bog, or wheelbarrow, or midway, or disturb? I hope you can all name those. Emily Dickinson, Walt Whitman. Anyway, who owns the wheelbarrow? William Carlos Williams. Who owns Midway? Dante. Midway on life's journey. Emily Dickinson, let me say this. A poet comes to own a word because a poet has so birthed it into existence that we can never not encounter the word without hearing an echo of the poet who first gave us the word, the poet who first broke open and fed us the word. Emily Dickinson, as almost all poets concede, owns the word slant. Poets who use the word now do so with the full knowledge that its use will be an allusion to Dickinson. Here's her well-known poem. You have this with you. Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies, too bright for our infirm delight. the truth's superb surprise. As lightning to the children eased with explanation kind, the truth must dazzle gradually, or every man be blind. Not only does the word slant seem so distinctly Dickinson's word, but it also serves as a word through which we might look upon and understand her broader work. In other words, slant suggests to us a specific way to interpret her work as a whole. The word cues us into an argument we might make about her presence of mind, her philosophy as a poet. Notably, of course, her poems are known to one degree or another for their use of slant rhyme. And her use of this form of rhyme, using words with similar but not quite identical sounds, distinguishes her poetic voice among her contemporaries. To those contemporaries, the truth of rhyme, we may need be reminded, was not in fact slant. But Dickinson's poetry, as we know, came to dazzle gradually. And now her slant rhymes, as well as the truths her poetry gives us, provide us with superb surprises our ears as a poetry reading public have come to understand as true, full of truth and one more way to get closer to the all, not just the convenient portion we believed all along, of truth. Charles Wright says, words, like all things, are caught in their finitude. Our task as readers and as writers is to find those ways in which words might break out of their finitude and announce their infinitude. They exist within finitude, but we sometimes glimpse or hear their infinite quality. Perhaps in the best poems, all the words point beyond themselves. At a minimum, they point to all the others, or all the others point back, or all the words become lenses through which to understand every other word, or only one word, or maybe one word becomes the one lens through which we imagine the possibilities of every other word. Or every word becomes itself so clearly that it becomes other than we know it, other than it is, in the way that we ourselves sometimes wish to become other and otherwise, and in doing so become wise, wiser than we are, knowing other than the broken, partial, glass darkly knowing we know. If, as I've claimed, a poet owns a word, what if we approach this idea from the viewpoint of the individual poem? Let us turn the idea around and say that a word owns a poem. The word teaches us how to think about the poem. I've asked students for decades to choose one word in a poem that helps to interpret the rest of the poem. We might choose a word and the word might say, "No, I'm not the word. See that word over there? That's the word." All of us came into this poem because of it. We point to it. We serve it. Now, I understand that sounds a bit silly, and my students have laughed at me when I've said it. But here's what I have in mind. A paraphrase of Carl Jung says that everything in a given space helps to determine the meaning of the space. If we think of a poem as a given space, then how does one word teach us to gather all the other words together, to make sense of them, to locate the poem's central argument or purpose? Mary Oliver's short poem, Yellow, which is on your handout, can offer us a beginning sample to explore how a word might own a poem. Yellow. There is the heaven we enter through institutional grace, and there are the yellow finches bathing and singing in the lowly puddle. Which word teaches us how to interpret this poem? Is it the word yellow, heaven, enter, institutional, grace, finches, singing, lowly, maybe puddle? I've selected this poem partly because it's short, manageable, partly because it has several interesting options worth exploring. Suppose we choose the word yellow, since it serves both as the poem's title and as an adjective for finches in the third line. Surely its repetition adds to its importance. Yellow is a bright color, and this brightness often serves as a reminder of sunshine or hope, possibly even something as hard to pin down as joy. Perhaps the word serves as a reminder of heaven, a color even signifying grace, if a color can be said to signify such an abstraction. At a minimum, we can say that the word yellow contrasts with the lowly puddle of the last line. And perhaps in that way, in the way that we are taught that grace in the form of Jesus came down to earth, came down into our lowly position, into the muck and grime of our puddle, so to speak, then maybe we can think of the word yellow as a representation of that grace, allowing us to enter heaven. On the other hand, what if we choose the word institutional? Its presence stands out for more than one reason. First, it is multisyllabic and at 5 syllables longer than 3 by any other word in the poem. Second, except for abstractions like heaven and grace, the word stands in stark contrast to the poem's natural world images like finches and puddles. And since Oliver is known for her attention to the natural world, its presence most likely is not argued for or celebrated. Furthermore, in terms of the word's definitions, its presence obviously refers to our churches, our institutions, the very thing that Rousseau said corrupted us, and which Oliver's poems sometimes seem to imply. Are we then to read the poem as an indictment of our institutions, our unappealing and unimaginative understandings of what allows us to enter heaven? A more adventurous, albeit unlikely, choice might be the word and, serving as a coordinating conjunction, and thus joining the poem's 2 independent clauses. Oliver says, at least at the level of the poem's structure, quite simply, there is and there are. One thing equals another. There is this usual and typical way in which we enter heaven, this way that has become institutionalized and thus staid, regimented, monotonous, too easily known. And, equally valid but perhaps less accepted, there are these natural world images like finches in a puddle that likewise become ways to enter into heaven, into grace. The institutional way takes us indoors, into sanctuaries, while this other way leads us out into the natural world, as Oliver's poems have always insisted upon. Someone might even choose the linking verb are for how, at least within this poem's equation, one side of the formula is singular, there is, while the other side is plural, there are. As if to say that when we turn to the natural world and its images, we find a multiplicity of ways in which to enter heaven. Finches bathing and singing become another form of church, perhaps one with which we can more readily identify. I can't help but remember Keats saying, "If a sparrow comes before my window, I take part in its existence and pick about the gravel." Seeing Oliver's yellow finches, especially when contrasted with institutional grace, a reader's sympathies might be more inclined to align with those finches, taking part in their existence, their particular heaven, even if standing in a puddle. As one can see, choosing a word through which to interpret a poem offers interesting payoffs, each distinctive in its own way, each like a facet on a diamond, each part added together to increase the brilliance of the whole. Perhaps Oliver's poem should really be understood through the word bathing, with its implied baptism, or perhaps the word singing is a good choice, calling to mind hymns, praise, joy, or redemption. Maybe the word lowly teaches us how to think about this poem, since buildings, churches, are often grand architectures meant to inspire us, meant to point us toward heaven, toward the sky and what's beyond. And for many people, including Christians, these buildings, these institutions, have become the only ways to think about entering heaven. Perhaps Oliver wishes to make a case instead for what's lowly, for what lies close by and might never be considered as a way to enter the heaven we seek. Of course, her choice of this word might be an indictment of Christians' sometimes narrow, conventional, institutionalized experiences of what qualifies as grace. The word that owns a poem serves as the poem's central intersection, a place to which all the poem's tensions can be traced. The word both opens up the poem's possibilities and gathers them back together. It is key to the poem's tension and resolution and helps the reader and the poet to understand the poem's purpose more fully. The word that owns the poem is where the poem's originality begins and where the poem's far-flung complications eventually come to rest. The word that owns the poem is the struck stone from which the poem's living waters flow. If a poem can be said to have an etymology, then we can trace it back to the word that owns the poem. Own, meaning to possess, have, rule, be in command of, have authority over, originating from Old English, from the root agon, meaning to have, to own, literally possessed by. A poem is possessed by a word, and that word commands the poem, directs it, has authority over it, teaches us how to get nearer to the poem's center. All the other words of the poem are the fruit of the one word. Perhaps our attempts to interpret the poem are, in fact, attempts to assess which word directs the others. It whispers itself through the consonants and vowels, through the diphthongs and phonemes of all the other words. Sometimes the word that owns the poem does so because it stands out visually. Other times its novelty intensifies its presence, since, as someone once said, we are seduced by every anomaly. The seemingly out-of-place word, the one that leaps off the page, the one that catches us off guard because of its unexpectedness, sometimes that word commands the text. Take, for instance, a word like supernumerary, used by Jane Hirschfield to describe joy in her poem Five-Legged Chair. The word isn't ordinary to most readers, not part of our daily vocabulary. Therefore, Hirschfield's use of the word heightens our experience of the poem in the way that encountering a new experience heightens our day-to-day lives. It recasts our interpretation of a word like joy and forces us to re-examine what we thought we already knew. Such a word announces itself. It takes possession of our attention, if for no other reason than it requires us to consult a dictionary or to question our own authority as a reader. In short, such a word destabilizes our assuredness, so that suddenly the poem is in control of us instead of the other way around. We have to stay with the word, plumb its meaning, solve its riddle, before it will allow us to move on in our attempt to understand the poem's fullness. Since a word's presence is unaccountable, we first have to account for it, consider it, dwell upon its particular mystery. Sometimes a poet explores a word by breaking it apart, expanding its possibilities, making us actually see or experience the word in a new way. Take E.E. Cummings' well-known poem, I don't even know how to say the title of the poem, but that's on your list. And essentially you can see within it, there is the word loneliness, but inside it, there is a leaf falls, so vertically down the page. One cannot hear the word in the poem, one has to see it on the page. Whether we accept or reject his use of form mirroring content, we at least recognize his intention. Within the word loneliness, Cummings gives us the image of a leaf falling, perhaps a cliche, but his arrangement of these letters tumbling down the page, one or two or three at a time, serves to mimic the leaf's fall. Notice how the third line's AF reverses, turns back in on itself, becoming FA in line 4. And notice how line 5's double L's, at least in terms of sound, if there can actually be sound in such a reading, seems to draw out the L sounds, almost like a lull, as if the leaf stalls just a moment. Line 7 becomes the word one, emphasizing the leaf's singularity, its oneness, its loneliness, becoming then in the next line just one L, perhaps like a stem holding the word one above it. Then that final line provides visually the syllables of I-ness with the hint of I positioned at the beginning, almost like its own concept, as if a leaf had a self, as if a leaf falling through the center of a word called to mind how lonely an I can be. In a way, Cummings' poem, if it captures our attention, does so because of its clever use of a word within a word. Other times a word comes to own a poem by virtue of its syntactical placement. Quite literally, the poem seems to assemble itself around the word. Jane Hirschfield's small poem, Tree, serves as a model. I'll read this poem. Tree. It is foolish to let a young redwood grow next to a house. Even in this one lifetime, you will have to choose. That great calm being, this clutter of soup pots and books. Already the first branch tips brush at the window. Softly, calmly, immensity taps at your life. Though one might make an argument about any number of words in this poem, I would argue that immensity owns this poem. The logic of the poem all the while is directing us toward the argument of this word. The poem's tree, a young redwood, becomes a way to talk about how immensity already announces itself in your life, whether or not you are prepared for it. The way in which that last line seems drawn out more slowly than the rest of the lines places more emphasis on the statement being made. The rest of the lines, for the most part, offer monosyllabic words such as let, grow, house, choose, calm, books, and brush. Occasionally we encounter two-syllable words, foolish, redwood, lifetime, being, clutter, and window. None of these words, though, comes in succession. Only when we reach the last line do we encounter three multisyllabic words in a row. Softly, calmly, immensity. Even the meter of these words signals a slowing down, a focusing of the poem toward its central word. Listen to how the last line begins with a trochee, softly, stressed, unstressed, followed by another trochee, calmly, and then, upsetting the pattern, the more naturally sonically fulfilling sound of two iambs, immensity, softly, calmly, immensity. We land on the word immensity with more force, more attention, and whether we are aware of it or not, more ease, since iambic meter is more natural to our speech patterns. Since the word signals the poem's central conceit, we understand that the four short stanzas have all along been leading us to this word. Another short poem to illustrate syntax, delivering us to the poem's central word, is Czeslaw Miłosz's Encounter. I'll read this poem. Encounter. We were riding through frozen fields in a wagon at dawn. A red wing rose in the darkness, and suddenly a hare ran across the road. One of us pointed to it with his hand. That was long ago. Today, neither of them is alive, not the hare, nor the man who made the gesture. Oh, my love, where are they? Where are they going? The flash of a hand, streak of movement, rustle of pebbles. I ask, not out of sorrow, but in wonder. The poem offers a brief and simple memory, an encounter. And even if that title sets forth part of the poem's argumentative appeal, an encounter is unexpected, something ordinary or casual, but also with a hint of chance. But Miwash seems intent on revealing how the landscapes through which we move are full of ordinary, casual, but meaningful gestures. The poem, we might note, moves effortlessly through the expanse of time, and perhaps that expanse of time affords us the perspective to move through sorrow to wonder. Perhaps Miwash is also aware that the word encounter originates from ideas that mean a contest, a hostile meeting of adversaries, and confrontation. Does the poem enact the drama of such an encounter? Or is the poem itself a confrontation, a contest between poet and reader, between sorrow, our normal response to loss, and wonder, an unexpected response to loss? Miwash's poem delivers us to its final word, wonder. But the poem's argument hinges on this word thwarting our expectation, giving us not exactly what we might expect. The word wonder casts itself expansively back through every other word of this poem, shading them with the idea of how inexplicable anything actually is. Everything is mystery, unexplainable, unaccountable, unfathomable, incapable of being fully interpreted. Miwash, a Catholic, a Nobel Prize winner, explores this intersection of the mundane and the divine throughout his body of work. But this short poem, when encountered, resonates with readers because of its recognition of what we already know. The poem begins with we, a collective. But at the heart of this collective lies the mystery of loss, of we becoming eventually only I. The individual mind attempting to comprehend time, which is both finite and infinite, as well as one's place within time, an encounter whose outcome remains ultimately unknown, if not unknowable to us. Where are these people going, riding in a wagon at dawn? Are they a family? Are they humankind? Is the wagon simply a reminder of another age, Miwash having been born in 1911? Or is the wagon a metaphor for our passage through time? Are we being ferried not across the river Styx, but across frozen fields? Why are the fields frozen? And what is this red wing rising in the darkness? A sharp and colorful contrast to the frozen fields? An omen? A subtle hint of the Holocaust, of which Miwash's poems are haunted, if not saturated? Then that word suddenly appears. Since always, the unexpected thing is about to occur. The unexpected image, the unexpected moment, the unexpected movement, the mind bent and burdened, but also blessed by something it can't account for. Thus, a hand thrown up. Thus, a poem composed. Thus, a word to hold forth out of the self, and even the word too, unfathomable, inexplicable, incomprehensible. Where are they? Where are they? Miwash asks. And the repetition of the question captures a sense of urgency, an acceleration toward locating an answer. And since we all ask our own forms of that question, the poem puts us in touch with our own sorrow and with our own deep down questions about what follows any life, particularly the lives of those people who formed our collective we, as well as the singular life each of us is living, this presence of mind that shapes our own inexplicable, solitary I. Each of us, like Miwash, like every poem, asks and asks within the boundaries of time, within the unfathomable mystery of our own existence. And the asking is not sorrow, it is wonder. Wonder, from Old English, meaning marvelous thing, miracle, object of astonishment. Wonder, meaning far beyond anything previously known or anticipated. Encounters turn miraculous. Encounters become ways to step into mystery. Encounters signify beyond what we, either collectively or individually, can point toward or exclaim. Something can suddenly appear before us, a field, a red wing, a hair, a hand, a life, a poem, even a single word. And some place inside us, some undeniable and unfathomable constant observer, full of questions, leaps toward what it cannot fully know. It lives, as only it can, inside one word. Thank you.
Take some questions.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, you can ask any questions, but be brief, and thank you.
Anybody have a question? I can tell you this, that when I did this at the Duck River Writers Conference that we had, I think I had like an hour and 20 minutes or something. And so I had another handout with about 4 poems on it, where we kind of then had a discussion. We read a Walt Whitman poem, When I Heard the Learned Astronomer, Amit Majmudar poem, The Elevator Operator. And we had a discussion about, okay, well, what do you think, which poem owns this poem? And that was so rich because, like I said in the lecture, it's almost like having a facet on a diamond. There's not a right or wrong answer, right? There are all these possibilities of which word owns the poem, but each word teaches us a different, slightly different way of thinking about all the other words. And so whenever, each person would give an option, it was like we were getting closer and closer to the magnitude of the poem, if that makes any sense. So, I would make a suggestion when you're reading other people's poems, ask yourself which word owns this poem. But since many of us in the room are writing ourselves, you might ask yourself about your own poem, especially if you're not exactly sure about is it finished yet? Am I still revising this poem? It's a good question to ask. Which poem or which word owns this poem? Which word can teach me how to think about this poem in a different way? And by asking that question, again, the poem becomes maybe more deeply itself, but then full of more possibilities. Dave?
You talked about the words, including their origins. Well, in the Miwash, the original words were in Polish.
Right. Yeah, good point. Thanks for bringing that up.
How does that affect our ability to perceive key words in a poem?
Well, I don't know how to answer that question, but I'm so happy that someone, Robert Haas, I guess, translated Miwash's poems. So, you would have to imagine that the process of translation itself weighs each word, right? So I don't know, obviously the experience of any translated poem is not the full experience of the poem, right? Because we're not standing in that language. I'm not even sure that any of the words in that poem get anywhere close to the original. I'm just taking the word of the translator.
I remember reading Coleman Barks on translating Rumi, earlier, and he said that he did not speak Farsi, or he had someone give him a literal word translation of the poem, and he thought about those words in that order, and then wrote a poem, which he hoped would capture the spirit, but didn't necessarily include any of the words originally.
Well, that's, I'm not the person to talk about that, but there are different camps of translators, right? Some of whom are more like the, Robert Bly version, which may or may not be too much tethered to the original, like you're talking about with Coleman Barks. And then others, of course, who are really strict about the translation. Anything else? Questions? Yeah.
Thank you very much. That just gave us so much to think about. One of the things that I began to think about as you were developing the ideas was that maybe it's not always a single word that owns the poem, but a phrase. I mean, it can be a lot of things. I also thought about poets who are aware of the tendency of the word or phrase to own the poem and struggle against allowing anything to own it.
Yeah.
Which is kind of an interesting. If you could think of an example of a poet that seems to be doing that's interesting to me. And then finally, my last thought was sometimes I imagine it could be both ways, but in your experience, do you think that a poet will select a word, a concept, and then a word, and build a poem around it, so it owns the poem from the beginning? Or does the word that ultimately owns the poem emerge only as the whole poem is written?
Yeah, second question, yeah. And I don't necessarily think that we're all that conscious of which word as we're writing, and not everybody will agree with me on this, but I think I write from the viewpoint of beginning with not knowing, and then something is revealed to me. So I don't technically think that I own the words necessarily. But when this idea came up, I mean, I've said this for years in my classes, 25 or 30 years, that, a poet owns a word. Emily Dickinson owns the word slant. I mean, if you use the word now, it's an echo of her. And there are particular poets who are so identified with a word, right? But I don't think that they consciously knew that that'd be the word that we identify with them. I don't think that William Stafford, who I teach, to me, he owns the word swerve. It comes up in a couple of his central poems. That may just be a partly accident of anthologies, because he has a lot of other poems, but those seem to be the poems, Traveling Through the Dark, for instance. And those poems come to take up residence in anthologies and in the public mind, even though there are a lot of other poems that he has. So he is identified somehow with that word. I think he might be surprised that we have Dickinson might be surprised that slant is the word, right, that we identify with her. But I got a little bit into it in the lecture, but those words become ways in which we can look at the broader work of the writer and interpret that work through that lens, the lens of that one word. I think about, for instance, and I've said this in other places, and some of you may have heard me say this, but Natasha Trethewey, contemporary poet, former poet laureate of the United States, and Pulitzer Prize winner. On my blog, if you're interested, you can look at my discussion of first poems. And they're the discussions of first poems in, for the most part, poets' first books. And in her case, I discussed the first poem in her book, but the first line in that poem is so telling, because she says, in the foreground, 2 women. It's a picture, that she's writing about from 1902, I think. And it's 2 washerwomen, one of whom has stopped and is more still and clearly in focus in the photograph. The other woman didn't really stop working, so she's kind of blurry, right? And so in the foreground, 2 women. I don't think that Natasha Trethewey possibly knew that this poem, as her first poem in her first book, might give us a seed through which to see all of her later work. But it's there. She's very much she writes a lot about history. And history itself is partly in focus when we look back at it. We understand, we can make sense of certain things. There's another part of history that's just like that other washerwoman. We don't have a handle on it. It's slightly out of focus. Trethewey herself has taken washerwomen who are typically in the background, right, in history. Black women who are typically in the background in history, and she places them in the foreground. And that's part of the project of some of her work. Those 2 women, well, they become later in her work herself and her mother. And she has all these poems about herself and her mother. And maybe her mother is 2 women. The one that she knows and can recognize because she died early. And, she has the history, the memory of her. But there's a part of her mother that she is out of focus, right? There's also the 2 women become herself and her mother, as I said. But, sometimes one is clearly in focus, one is not. Trethewey herself is biracial. So the 2 women become her. Sometimes the black part of her is foregrounded and the white part is backgrounded. And then the next poem you read, the white part is foregrounded and the black part is backgrounded. But in the foreground, 2 women. Just this little phrase is so, the implications of it are so rich throughout the body of her work. But I don't necessarily think that that's ever consciously determined. I do think it's revealed and discovered as we go. So, sorry to get off on, I could talk about Natasha Trethewey. Maybe I'll do a whole lecture about her one day. I'm such a fan. Anything else?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jeff, you have to listen to him talking. You can listen all day. He's so inspiring, discussing anything about poetry. And we are blessed to have him today talk to us. And now you can't just walk away without thinking about words when you read the poems. So awesome. So now we have some audience still there to read. So we have the open mic poetry session for the afternoon. Yes. Olivia. And yeah.
There's coat spilled on the floor. Take it out back there.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Olivia Pridemore. Today I'm going to be reading a couple of poems from you from a collection I'm currently working on entitled Nostalgium. This is a work that explores identity in relation to the concepts of the body and the home through combining poetic segments with altered images of objects found around my house. I am the managing editor of Silvering Dole Press, so if you want to come talk to us afterward, we'd love to hear from you. This first one, Corporal Math, is my best attempt at a visual representation of eating disorders. Body dysmorphia is a very illogical thing. I decided to use mathematical concepts to impose some sort of order on the irrational. Corporeal Math. Every day, she tries to count past 1,000. She feels 100 in her hips, 237 on her thighs, 458 under her arms, 615 swells in her stomach, and then she subtracts. This next poem is one of my newer pieces. My husband and I are really into crafting, so a lot of the imagery and description is derived from materials we use in our projects, and it's called Heavenly Bodies. The world is a model town I keep closeted in my spare room, resting atop the burnished brown French Altier 8-seater, once known as Wedding Gift. I am neither God nor Atlas, but isn't it ephemeral to think of deities as hobbyists? Our house rounds out a profane crescent of weathered domiciles, rain-stained and wearing the skin of eclipsed plumage, yet you are comfortable in your office. 1,200 grit paper is just coarse enough to freshen the face of my miniature. I repaint her every day. Buffed and primed, she welcomes the Lynx camel hair, ready to bond with polycarbonate pigmentation. Her countenance burnt umber, her wrath cerulean. Fine red sable punctuates detail, fulvous lips and smaragdine eyes sealed with a coat of lacquer. Still, she seems a poor match for the homestead and her contented husband. I test her acquiescence in woodland product number PF 8675, a grove of conifer and deciduous armatures paired with emerald foliage. Dissociated limbs litter the coarse turf, and she is perturbed by the crunch underfoot. I bathe in the whir of a canister shaker, turning medium gray blend ballast with steady hand. I cut a crude trail through the forest, out into plains of Vietnam earth and African dust, weaving past autumnal fields and ancient rock quarries until gravel marries well-hewn dirt roads, leading straight to the heart of town. I station my miniature at the south end of Merchants Row, loitering near Harrison's Hardware, plastered with crumbling brick wallpaper. She is in view of the haberdashery and Prentice & Son, where gentlemen conduct business with local attorneys. Across the street, children fly in and out of general stores, eager to buy a nickel's worth of penny candy. Each townsperson is rich with built-in character variety, a feat made possible by dry transfer decals. Still, she resists adhesives. I help her steal away on an HO scale locomotive BR-86. Exiting the train at the next depot, she rents a room at the historic Ashmore Hotel. There, she must wait, left to ponder the trivialities of clapboard siding until tomorrow brings fresh enamel. How much time do I have left? Is that it? Okay. I don't think I have time for another one, so I hope you guys enjoyed that.
Thank you, Olivia. It wasn't bad, was it? Reading? Yes, great. Yeah, I want everybody to try. Not try, do it. She was saying, I might, so I said, do it. So, yeah, we have about four readers from the audience, and the next one we are going to have Paul Raymond, poet and songwriter, play some songs for us.
Thanks, Garrett. I was supposed to be here earlier, and I'm really sorry for the confusion, but I'll do a couple quick songs. So I'll play 2 songs that I think are actual poems I set to music, and oops, that's not what I want to do. So they're I consider them poems, but they're played with a guitar. This is called We Become Glass. We are standing in the rain, staring into the grave, and moment by moment, drop by drop, everything falls away. Everything falls away. Everything falls away. Waiting for a new light to show the way. Holding on to shade, shadows lead the way. Shadows lead the way. And turn by turn, road and river, some things never show. Some things never show. Some things never show. Trying to keep from falling apart, we become glass. We become glass. We become glass. So that's that. Thank you. I'm gonna do a trick on this one. So thank you for listening. This room sounds pretty nice, actually. So oops. This is a song I wrote in Florida about a year ago. And it's called Salt in the Ocean. I don't think I played this publicly before, so I'll try to not screw it up too bad. I gotta remember how it goes. what's my finger pattern? See, I get nervous in front of people, can you tell? Every day I write the songs that keep me open. And every day I find another chord. Where you coming, I'm hoping. Where you coming, I'm hoping. I love you like the salt in the ocean. There's no better way to keep me floating. When the air's too thick to breathe and the way too choked to leave, every day I write the songs that keep me open. And every day I walk the road that keeps me staying. And every day I find another way. And that leads me to learning. And that leads me to learning. Songs I do not know, with words I cannot sing, and all the songs are broken. Thank you. I feel like there's a million amazing songwriters in Nashville, and I'm trying to do something that's different, so I don't know if this is different or not, but it feels different to me, not so much verse, chorus, bridge kind of structure. So anyway, hope you liked it. Thank you for listening. Thanks, Vera.
So, my name is Yvonne, and this is my first time reading publicly ever. So, I have a couple of poems that I'm going to share today. One was written when I was in graduate school, actually, and the funny thing about it is I had misplaced the original draft. I only remembered a portion, and so I said a prayer that I didn't share with my mom. I said, sure do hope, God, that you will bring this poem back to me. And a couple months later, she said to me, I found an old journal of yours. And sure enough, there it was. So this one I'm calling right now Cloudy. Temporary blindness happened to me night before last. Memories once so vivid, gone. I couldn't quite see my past. Makes me wonder, contemplate, how helpful clouds can be, that shield me from the scorching sun and kindly shower me. It's beneficial, I must admit, to forget a broken heart, ill-spoken words and deeds misdone, and days dear ones departed. But what about the melodies hummed delightedly or the taste of marshmallow crumpets served with our version of high tea? Why hide celestial bodies that twinkle and twilight? Why dim a cherished memory or cast over recollection's light? Perhaps it's for protection, to prevent my living enthralled in a past no longer present, marking time, not moving on. And that's cloudy. Okay, and the next poem was written very recently. The title here is Way Made in the Wilderness. And it's about a writing group that I happened to find about 1.5 years ago. Found by way of happenstance, once timid heart, emboldened by chance to join in joy and delighted sowing and the tending to of seedlings growing. Here workers gather on a homestead urban, tilling rich soil with masterful hands. Serendipity cleared a path to a vast, fertile land, or did Providence bestow? Way made in the wilderness. As in the past, today may demand for some entry only after harangue. In this almost Eden, not so, but a harvest at hand for all, each to reap row by row. Clearing the weedy bramble, a painstaking plan, way made in the wilderness. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. And the word is serendipity for that poem. And also, serendipity comes from the word serendip, and I have to say that because Serendip is a country where I am from originally. It's now called Sri Lanka. It used to be called Serendip by the Arabs, by serendipitous. But originally they called it Serendip, and then the word was coined by an English literary person. I forgot the name, but he came up with the word serendipity and all that. So the word is serendipity. Serendipity, yes. And next is Abigail Harrelson.
I promise my hands are shaking because I had a lot of coffee earlier. No, that's not true. I'm a terrible liar. Might as well come out with that now. Yvonne and I were talking earlier about how nervous we were about this because, like her, this is my first public reading ever. But she crushed it. That was wonderful. It was great. So hopefully mine goes just as well. So I am currently a senior in high school, in my last semester there, about to go to college. And so everything I write right now is kind of about coming of age and struggling for independence. And, you know, you want to be on your own, but then you're on your own and you say, oh no, I want to go back home. So yeah, I'll start. She huffs in, blue canvas garb and arms bedecked by grocery bags. Deem her. Okay. A miffed southern Shiva, and I'm sure that at present she'd have given anything for just as many arms. Philip, you didn't scrape the drive, so awful I wouldn't almost stay on it. Her proclamation lurched across the wall, between our kitchen and family room. I couldn't, it rained this morning. It's dry now, it rained this morning. Reaching out, you could have plucked the air and played a rue tune. I'm standing in the door muckshod, from sloshing around in the creek, only visible through the window are the dirt-stamped soles of his socks, perched upon the sofa arms, and her face. There must have been a fetter pulled taut like a scold's bridle, securing her chin to the collar. The sun retreats and supper is tame. I ask if later I can take my bike up to the road, supervised, of course. Mother agrees, and no, I'm glad. In truth, I'd been hoping for a yes, not from her, but from my dad. As we go, the dogs escort us along the gravel. I coax them back, tease a race, and take off. They pursue. My legs pump fervently, whip the air and dust into a froth. I soar. But she'd been right about the drive. I hit a goalie and nearly crash, imagining already the sting of grated knees. When I feel her mother hands right me, plant their palms in my back and propel me faithfully forward. As we reach the road, she gives me a great final push, and I know it was all she had. Giggles and shrieks, I'm besotted with joy. I glide along and glance back, hoping to meet her eyes, our blue eyes, and share this delight with her. But I've rounded a curve and gone too far, too fast to see her, though I know she'll be standing there always. And this second one, it was kind of one that just comes in the moment. I was sitting on my bed doing homework or something, I don't really remember. But I look down and the fan is on because it's hot, and I see this feather that's partially sticking out of my blanket, and I noticed that in the wind. I was like, wow, that looks like a bug that's trying to fly somewhere very quickly, but can't because it's stuck. So this one is called April 6th because I wrote it on April 6th, and I could not think of a better title. The down feather appeared in the gale, with its dainty tufts billowing, to be a scurrying spider. For it was trapped on one end by some thread, but on the other, allowed to thrash and scamper freely, subjected unduly to the mighty gusts of the ceiling fan. It might fly away, disappear, and mingle with the dust at any moment. Thank you, guys.
So, April 6th, and the downy feather. Yeah. And you too, that we are so proud that's your first reading, and this is why it's so worth it, all the trouble we go through to make this happen. This is what we are paid in. So, thank you. Next is Justin Patterson. Oh.
Oh, first I want to thank everybody for being here. I'm the visual art director for Silver Needle Press, and it's been great to talk with everybody that we've gotten to chat with so far. You know, one thing we pride ourselves on is keeping open communication between artist and publisher. And so kind of on that note, I'd like to share with you one of my own poems. I'm writing a graphic novel right now called Where the Crows Go. And I drew a particular panel of this graphic novel that included a character inspired by a man who was kind of down on his luck that I met in a deli several years ago. And since then, I've been kind of obsessed with the character who is so obviously beyond me in wisdom, but that society would value underneath me. This poem is called The Mountains Have Changed Them. When earthworms sprout from wet ground, he is perched, flightless on the edge of grocery store parking lots, face in the dirt. He surfaces new life between black teeth, wriggling in pink. He shares with me, rib cage to dust between mortar and pestle, head like a shovel. Thank you.
Wonderful job. Asperged, the word. I'm going to do this for, I don't know how long or forever, the word. You know. And probably the word will go with you. And that's the Bible word. But so next, we'll start with our authors. Anybody in the audience still want to read? Are you reading? Sure? Okay. You read? You want to read another one? Okay. So, Okay, come on. And then we'll go with the authors. We have a few authors still to read. So after Olivia's next poem, we'll do the authors reading.
This one is new, and I'm really excited about it because I'm kind of experimenting with form. I structured this piece as a poem with corresponding footnotes, and there is a lot of Japanese language used in the piece because my brother currently lives in Japan, and we're really close. It's been difficult to be separated, but yeah, I just really focused on the juxtaposition between Eastern and Western and traditional and individual here in this piece, so I hope you enjoy it. It's called One-chan. I lost a game of shogi in your dishonor. Forgive me for never telling you about the sting of bile or the seduction of funhouse mirrors. There is no character in hiragana, katakana, or kanji to mimic the sound of purification. Tosan eyes your baggy trousers with pride, but I grow to resent the palate-cleansing properties of miso. Why didn't I mention the veneers or the constipation? Kachan will weep to learn that her children have written the same story. 1. I remember the first time you bested me in a match. I was afraid that you would win and equally afraid that you wouldn't. You cried ote through beaming lips. Thank you for not feigning humility, as I was unable to conceal my hatred for you in defeat. 2. The summer I turned 18, I would steal away to Redbox and smuggle home R-rated movies stuffed in my jacket. We split headphones so we could hear authority creeping up the stairs. 3. Our trip to Kyoto made the day-to-day seem profane. On the plane ride over, you slept peacefully for the first time in months. In my mind's eye, I can still see you standing amidst the ruins of Honamaru, veiled in the light shade of topiary pines. I have no memory of your voice. Neither of us would speak. 4. In our senior year, you entered an amateur manga competition just for the $50 Sapporo gift card. Over dinner, you told me that scraps from yatai carts could put even world-renowned Anglo-Asian cuisine to shame. And I didn't believe you until I saw the sun set over Fukuoka City and the past emerged from alleyways and abandoned parking lots. 5. I always had better handwriting than you. Mrs. Kirk chided your crooked sevens and jagged W's, but no matter how much I practice my characters, I am no match for your steady hand. Thanks.
Thank you, Olivia. We'll never ignore the sunset over abandoned parking lots anymore. It came out really nice. So now we'll go to the authors. Katherine Moore will be our next author poet. She has several books out there.
Thank you. I'm going to be reading first. I'm just going to read 2 poems. It's kind of late in the day. First, I'm going to read one that first appeared in this anthology, Sparrow's Trill, writers responding to the Charleston shooting. If you remember the Charleston shooting, someone went into a church and shot people while they worshiped, and it was racially motivated. I think it's very important, since poets try to speak to an indelible emotion or personal human experience, that we add a unique voice after a tragedy beyond the usual chatter. This is Theory of the Love of God. It may be a spell, the spell of all spells. I found an old necklace gifted to me by my friend Laura. At age 10, I held her hand on the way home from the bus stop, the white fingers entwined with the black, hand woven. They look like words on a page, handwritten. We walked like a proverb, hand-picked, prancing with the love of God. I have no control of spells of late. Laura is gone. Laws, sluiced, rapture. Yesterday, an earthquake in Michigan. Last night, a black spot on the moon. Today, they burned churches again in the South. In an ideal world, I'd place the cross back around my neck. And that was Laura Rollison that I wrote about. And I think of her often. So I wasn't going to read this one, but I was inspired earlier to share this one with you. When I was young, I lived in the Philippines, in Subic Bay. And for me in my childhood, the deep, dark Asian jungle was a world of play and wonder. And it wasn't until I was older and in middle school, I realized we were over there because of the Vietnam War, and that right across the South China Sea, the jungle was not a place of wonder for some Americans. Feeding monkeys. Behind the tremors, a broadleaf jungle breathing, its exotic bird vibrato, a vague motion of wind, the exhausted fungi, lie broad and mocking grins. Hey, they want bananas, not oranges, my brother shouts in preschool tones. We lob chunks of fruit into the trees, a barbed wire mysterious lush. This foliage looms in always nighttime tones. On a second plantain, the teeny glints emerge. A brow, a nose, expands into a face. Under leaves of the talsay tree, the eyes they hide, and they sway inches away within the green camouflage, waiting and wily. Not unlike the other things we don't see, like jungle cats, like the Viet Cong. Now, in a rapid fire of glee, we pitch them more fruit. Only the sound of the jungle knows, machine guns and monkeys. Together, one chants, one shrieks. Thank you.
Thank you, Katherine. So it's about racial violence and tether and camouflage. Other words.
I always bring the happy.
So, and the next poet, author is David Harris. And he has his book.
I have my book, but everything I'm reading today is from my next book, which won't be out until October. I'll start with the title poem of that book. The Art of Painting a Room. 1. Must you know why you are painting the room? Is this an assignment, or did you wake up and feel a need for difference? Do you know how you want the room to look, or do you want to leave the past behind? Can you start fresh with no idea of how the room looked when someone else painted it? 2. No idea? Impossible. The past is always tapping on your shoulder, demanding to be heard, acknowledged, revised. Find a place, slap on some paint. How does it look? Get some more on. and see if you like how it looks. If not, you can cover this just as if it had never been. Just keep working and watch the metamorphosis as the blank wall becomes something else. 3. First coat done. Step back. Let it dry. Is this the room you imagined? What have you learned about the room from painting it? Ask a neighbor to look at it from a window. Imagine all the furniture in different places, maybe Tangiers. Now you can do the second coat. 4. Maybe this one won't need a second coat. They always need a second coat. Some touch-ups on the trim, some holidays filled in. A different colored corner can surprise the eye that reads the room. Surprise yourself. Make it new and make it yours. And the 12-step program for all of us. Poets Anonymous. My name is Bill, and I'm a poet. With manly will, he doesn't add a word to round his final I am. The others nod their recognition and chant, "Hi, Bill." All dressed in business suits, no jeans, berets, or sandals in this group, who must avoid that poet look, lest to temptation, no fancy diction either, just plain speech. No meter to distract them from business, from the harsh reality of keeping jobs and making good and looking at a tree and seeing only bark and leaves. Bill says he's weaned himself, no more rhyme royal, only plain free verse. We all applaud. I generally go to a residential workshop every summer, and a couple of times I've been up to Colgate and I worked with Bruce Smith. And he gave us an assignment one day. He said, start a poem with a question and include in it somewhere a line from something else. So this was my assigned poem. Suburban Epiphany. Do poets of the old suburban towns pray vainly to Apollo for a theme, a subject worthy of their bardic gowns? Connecticut seems not a poet's dream. Of shopping malls and high schools they could write, of subdivisions, nannies, SUVs, but smooth and lustrous surfaces don't quite inspire great art, nor do those quiet scenes. But look inside that mall or listen close to mowers moaning of their ordered lives. The chaos held at bay engenders ghosts who stalk the perfect families with knives. The poets wait the rise of boogeymen, silent upon a peak in Darien. And I was talking to Jeff earlier, and I said that most of my poetry is autobiographical. This is finally got one here that is autobiographical. Bible Belter. You must feel safe on this flight. Air marshals? I looked around, but everyone seemed as normal as they could to a New Yorker leaving Nashville. More ties than usual and no beards, more polyester. Mostly couples, straight as tightropes. Except for you, he said. The plane is full of Baptist ministers, he said. And their wives, she said. Too late to get off the plane, too cheap to buy several bourbons, too honest to say I was a Baptist. He asked, and I told him I'm Jewish. He said he'd never met a Jew before living in Florida. He seemed to believe it. Then he asked about my distant cousin, Jesus. We talked about him for an hour or so. He didn't convert me, and I didn't convert him. But he started me down the road of Bible study. Next time, I'll be ready for him. Thank you.
Thank you, David. That's awesome. And you won't believe we have some very impressive people among us. And David is one of them. He looks simple, but he has big credential behind him. And the words are metamorphosis and boogeyman. And the next poet author is Louis Strang. And she has a book, and you have another one coming?
Oh, my dog and I are writing a book. We're going to take a break from poetry, and he's going to straighten out the common sense factor in the world, or the no common sense factor. So he's written a book. It's called If It Makes Sense, It's True. But anyway, this is Two Spirits here. And I have a poem here called White Bear Standing. When I met White Bear, he stood with other carvings, a smooth stone offering me a subtle invitation. As I held him in my palm, he warmed. Gently, I felt his spirit join mine. With dignity and purpose we were living, adventuring each into a world of our own nature, strong, brave, alive with the fire of new passions. When I met you, I saw White Bear standing and remembered where I had left him, waiting. Like us, 13 years of quiet within an earthen womb, cicadas are surfacing to live like us on water, air, and food. Some are losing freedom slowly, others quickly taken down like us, fulfilling nature's plan. Be it in webs by predators designed, tragic accident or fate, like us, most die silently, unknown. A special few are given brief extensions of their time, like us. By human hands, their caring deeds, born from naive childhood dreams of meddling in this ancient scheme. And this one is when I would hear people say, I'm sorry, and move on, and I was thinking about what is a real apology. So it's kind of lengthy for, everyday use, but it is a real apology. It's called apology. You, black inside a black bucket, if I had looked, could I have seen you? Would careful looking have saved you? I cannot know, so I suffer. No, I suffer because you paid the highest price for my neglect. I write to convince you I am sincere in my regret. Every morning and night I have done the same thing for years. No one has ever died. I pour 4 or 5 inches of water into the bucket to rinse it clean. How did that rise to the level of a murderous act? Flax, herbs, rice bran, alfalfa mixed with saliva, horse saliva, leaves a sticky residue that clings like glue. I was merely washing containers from last night's feeding. Cody's meal, Lace's meal, their buckets needed cleaning. One more relished meal's remains were scoured, flushed down the drain. I was horrified to see you there soaked, spilled out with the water, so cold after a brief submersion. A pain crossed my eyes just before they teared. I exclaimed, I am so sorry, desperate to convince God I believe every creature counts, to ask him to soothe my heart and mind. Too late to soothe yours? Shall I promise to remember your death each day for all of my life? Would having a place on the list of my painful regrets give you solace? Will it suffice for you to know no other creature will go unnoticed? Now, each morning and evening, I flip the bucket upside down as a salute to that vow. Thank you.
Thank you, Lois. And the words are waiting, surfacing, clinging. And you got a really good student, I think. And the next author and poet, the last but not the least for today, is me. So I write with my pen name, Viraja R. So I'm going to read from my new book. I have the proof here. So this is my first book, Joy of Being. That's a spiritual poetry. And this is Beyond Loving. That's for mothers, everything about for mothers and children. So poetry honoring every mother. So both of these books I did from A to Z, from the cover, back, everything. So proud of it. So I'm going to read one of the poems. It's inside. It's my this is my mom. So who is the reason I'm here, and also what I am and I was, a scientist or poet, everything because of her. And I never give up on anything, and I push myself to do things that I'm afraid of, or I'm here in front of you and try to make this thing happen. I'm sure that's because of her, because get out of the comfort zone. At school, she's there all the time. Nudge me. Okay. So anyway, so let me read that. A birthday memo. Letting me rule the day in tailor-made dresses, she always made my birthdays very special, with matching new ballerinas and stockings, chocolates and sweets to shower the friends, and mouthfuls of buttery cake that melts us away. Most of all, it is the day declared free from spanking. A day I tried to test her patience and the extent of her love in my childish little ways. I have gotten wiser by the year in her selfless love that burned deep within, just so we could emerge holding the torch of values. She stood by, honest and straightforward, fearing no evil. She held her head up with shimmering aura that kept everyone at bay, with such respect and awe. But she held me tight by the hand, protecting me in her shadow that was once my whole world and is still my safe haven, where my soul seemed to yearn for that torrential love of my mother to keep me afloat and rise above all the trials of life, still holding high the torch she passed on to me with pride. Trusting me to succeed, holding my head up in full honesty and conviction to see the beauty in all God's creations, including the humble me. The last line was a great truth that made me like, wow, yeah, I had to first accept and respect myself. Like, it's a big truth. So, do I have time? Okay. So in this book, I have kind of a little bit more courage than this one, so I did a little bit of this image things, a white rose with that, and a maraschino cherry, which is shaped like a cherry, trying to push the limits. But if one poem that I want to read, I have to go to my reference. Lucky for me, I have some notes at the back, so that helps me. So this is Tender Hope. I wrote this after I visited orphanage during my visit to Sri Lanka, and I was so amazed. I wanted to adapt every one of them. So as soon as I came back home, I wrote this. Tender hope. Barely toddlers, yet haven't got a real parent. But their little world is filled with selfless nuns and caring volunteers, solely hung on humanity, charity, so vulnerable and tender, heart-tugging little faces of winning swift smiles. Some still sigh, shedding tears, yearning for the fading faces, the voices that rock them to sleep, not there anymore, the lost souls. With hearts full of tender hope, their bright beaming eyes, wisdom beyond their age, bring joy and tears all at once. They thread their tiny fingers naturally like tender vines, feeling and checking the strength of the arbor. I know I fall short in measure, though I wish I could care for them all. So this was published in Best Poets of 2016 anthology. One more. Just one tiny biggie. This is a short poem. Trek joyously, very important, that's why I want to read. Trek joyously, with every step you take, the world turns. Thank you. Okay, the next. Next reader will be Louise. So we have three more. Okay.
I'm dedicating this to Nancy Fletcher Bloom. She's a native of South Carolina. Upcountry Carolina homecoming. Cousins kissing, talk and listen on parallel tiers. In a cappella roundelay, matching syllable to syllable, they sew words lightly, soul-warming pieces of patchwork quilts stitched together with hugs. They discuss ancestors as part of present lives. Great-granddaddy met great-grandmama at Seneca in 1904. They dissect door sepia pictures for foreheads and lips, lay fingers across chins and noses. See that mouth? That's James. There's great-granddaddy for sure, there in Tommy's eyes. Conversation boils like cresting cuffs of mountain rivers. Tongues curl richly around native names. Tugaloo, Tokoa, Wakula, Walhalla, Nantahala, Swanoa, Tuskegee, Kiwi. Crooning tones blend with shade tree music of flat-top guitar, banjo, fiddle, clacking spoons and clogging feet on squares of wood. Sweet dulcimers sing above the feathery squeals of playing children. Mothers smile. Honey, just mace that light on for me. You might put more Ritz crackers in that macaroni and cheese pie. Don't that smell good, though? Kitchen smells, biscuits, chicken, ham, barbecue, swirl out to gladden noses, braiding and unbraiding with scents of hibiscus, gardenias, purple thrift, roses, creamy lilies. Old horseshoe pitchers under the chinaberry tree pause and think eagerly of the feast to come after the blessing. They laugh about their long childhood wait for the old-timey preacher who blessed the children, blessed the green grass, blessed the blue sky, blessed the cooling food to our hungry bodies. The old men bless the young minister who sends God a short email instead of an epistle. They speak briefly with lowered lids of emotional blessings, of children, of wives. That grandson of mine is a pistol, all right. Then they pick up horseshoes again, looking kindly at the one who stands in silence, remembering grief. Have focused on target stakes, leaners, ringers. They listen for the signal to break bread together with kinfolks. Savor already respect due and given to the elders of the clan there at that long table. Upcountry Carolinians are huggers, touchers, givers, dancers, singers, fighters, drinkers, hunters, tellers of stories, lovers of God, children, and country, of women, and fierce freedom-fighting men, and time-misted Scots tartans, yesterday's gray homespun, and today's camouflage. Upcountry Carolinians are people-minded, mountain-minded, beloved. Thank you.
Thank you, Louis. That was South Carolina. Thank you. Do we have Okay. So the next one we have is Susie going to read Nancy Fletcher Plum's poem. Thank you.
My knees are killing me. This is a poem that Nancy Fletcher Bloom wrote, and she couldn't be with us today, but she's been such a huge supporter of the library and of the writing community that we thought she should be represented. Prayer. Needles of brown pine sigh under soft-skinned moccasins as blowing mountain winds are filled with the sweet fragrance of peach rhododendron, bruised by the passing touch of a gentle brown hand. His head, dressed with white owl feathers, lifts as the great Issaquina Falls breathe rainbow mists, covering his small birch canoe as it glides away. Accept him, O great Chaga River, O great mountains of veiled bloom.
Thank you for reading that. So prayer is the word. So the last but not the least, Bill Peach. Yes, and then we have to do the prize drawing, so thanks.
The reason I was reluctant, I have written in every genre except poetry. And here I am in the middle of a bunch of poets. But let me find it just a second. Okay, I'll just talk while I look for it. I have written a play, a memoir, newspaper columns, My favorite is thoughts. Just sitting around doing something. And this particular thing was out in my backyard cooking, roasting marshmallows and hot dogs. And something that I did reminded me of flag burning and cross burning. And I wrote essays in that narrative. But it reminded me of a poem I had written, and without you thinking about flags and crosses, and maybe throw in televangelist. And this is really, I guess, I would call it a poem, and I will read it to you. Infamous erection on a blood-soaked hill, real estate marker for bishop or king, gold and plastic sacred trinket, no charge with a love offering, plus $2.95 shipping and handling. Pompous oration on a tweedy lapel, overt invitation for approval, interminable silent soliloquy, impervious barricade to dissent, staff and banner of church and state, weapon of choice for patriot and zealot, to smother or bludgeon the human soul till the last disciple is vanquished, till cries of the mind are quiet and voices of the heart are still. Thank you.
There's a poster with information for poets from the neighborhood, how to submit poems. So please do submit to be read on the WCTV. And we thank WCTV and the interns, Michael, Austin, Jack. Awesome job. They are so patient. Thank you. Give them a hand. Okay. Thank you for making this a great day. And we want to see you next year and tell everybody how awesome it was and how much they missed, right? So tell that, and we'll see you next year. And keep in touch. And make sure you left your emails with us. Okay? Thank you. God bless you.